That's enough on the speed bag for now. You got a pretty good uppercut too, kid. We used to call guys like you bruisers. No, being a girl is more than the good looks. It's about having a memory that goes a long time before the war. Remember the teenager, the little fights, disappeared into a lot, came out a champion. I think his actual name was Bruno Burcheti. Near then a junkyard died. I think I have an old transcript about him somewhere next to the dummy over there.
Bruno Burcheti. I knew the face, long before I knew the name. To me, it was a face I saw years before I was made overseer. Even while we were still dating, decided to try something new. A down-home boxing match. I can still remember that ramshackle arena. The old wooden benches, probably taken as salvage. The smell of cheap cigarettes in the air. The pickaxe pilsner. The Blackwater brew. The smell. I'll always remember that smell. The first few matches were nothing special. Two guys beating on each other for 3 minutes. Bet a lot could have settled in those days with just two guys, instead of millions. Then the announcer rung that bell. A special match. The Teenage Terror. The mythos was narrated. Chained up in the junkyard by his father. Had to compete with dogs for scraps of food. I don't know what was fact, and what was obviously fiction. I could have never guessed his age when he finally came out. The fight was illegal, of course. This ramshackle arena was nothing sanctioned, let alone a teenage boy being pitted against a full-grown man. A bulldog of a boy, barely human. That jutting jaw, the nose, probably already broken half a dozen times in his short life. There was no headgear, not even sure there were mouth guards. His sideman could have been his father, uncle, or a complete stranger. Nobody remembered who he was anyway. The other man, his opponent, nobody I would like to see in a dark alley, or a well-lit one. Looked like something that had crawled out of the swamps near Harper's Ferry. The bell rung, and his opponent took a couple of jabs. Should have floored the boy, but he took them in stride, waiting, watching. Suddenly a flurry of body blows and an uppercut across the man's jaw. The men got up the first time, but not the second. A bloody heap on the ring floor, and a boy, almost half his size, standing, in victory, plump arms raised. He cherished the roar of the crowd. It was a good number of years later, when at Vault Tech, they told us about the need to train the physical as well as the mental. Most of the girls were taken easy on. Most weren't going to become overseers. But I wanted to see if I could take a few blows and stood with the men. And then he came out, Chevin nearly bald. That same bulldog, but twice the weight he once was, and standing a good 6 inches above me. I was only sure it was him because of that same look in his eyes. He wanted victory, and he was going to get his praise from Vault Tech now. The first student up figured he moved fast enough to fend off such a brute, but he was sorely mistaken. 2 medics had to carry him away 5 minutes later. I didn't see him at the university after that. The next few were more cautious, rightly fearful, but he took them all down. 1 or 2 managed to get in a decent jab or two, but once they were all bloody on the ground, his growl of voice remarked, "Lesson learned." I volunteered next. I knew Ivan might no longer recognize me after this, but I had to take a chance to show Vault Tech that I was ready. Thankfully, I was given headgear, a mouth guard. I didn't care that was a girl. Took several doctors to reset my jaw. Thankfully, my nose also healed, and no brain damage. But I didn't resent him. Showed up for a dozen or so lessons in bare-knuckle fighting. He was as instructive as he was merciless. Wanted to make us fighters, not simply beat us. When they told me I'd be an overseer, I had achieved everything, but I'd pay a terrible price. Leave Ivan behind. I had my staff selected for me, but I got to make a few requests. One of them was to have Bruno in my corner. I needed to be strong, especially now. He showed up, maybe a month before it all happened, a sack of clothes and a gym bag. Nothing was really saved. Nothing needed to be saved. He split his time between training and security. He was who you called in when diplomacy failed, a boogeyman to keep them in line. He taught his lessons well. The medics can confirm that. But to this day, I think as many survived as did because of that. He respected anybody who stood up and was ready for the fight. He beat them badly, usually, but he gave a deserved pat on the shoulder for having the courage to face him. Eventually, against better judgment, there was a fight club, of sorts, the tallest, the strongest, and some of the stupidest, all stood in line to try their hand at the bruiser. I can think of a few times when somebody got the better of him. Jerry knocked him on his ass, at least once. Annabelle gave him a few fresh bruises, and I think they loved him even more for it. When it was outside of the ring, he wasn't a violent person. Most of the time, he didn't get in his way, but he didn't go out of his way to be a bully. I know he had a girl in engineering. Maybe it was in maintenance. I'm not sure. Did he ever want to become a husband or a father? I don't know. But in a way he was a father, more so than anybody to Sebastian, more so than Major Star had the right to be. Soon, among others, he and Sebastian gave lectures in those final months about survival, about learning to live in a new world, what sacrifice meant, what you truly had to do to live. He was still nursing a black eye, a not quite broken nose, and fresh bruises when he had our big party before Reclamation Day. But his eyes were looking 1,000 yards ahead, to tomorrow. The bruiser could finally have his big bout with the world. A year through hell, and back to Sutton. I wasn't sure about the rest, but I knew I'd be seeing the bruiser again, on my doorstep. I walked in, a mixture of torn shirt and some old police uniform, some old welding helmet, and he had fashioned a beer skull into some kind of punching gauntlet. He looked right in my eyes and blamed me. There was no excuse. I had traded so much for my career, but it could be all forgiven. The question was, whatever or not, I was ready to risk it all. For victory, for my title shot, for a new fight that would settle my place in history. I was at a loss for words, but I told him that people were coming back to West Virginia. He just stood up, turned away. Leaving my door, he simply said, "Round 2.
The world wasn't going to wait for people to make up their minds. One of the few smart things my old man said to me: "You grow up in a junkyard with a son of a bitch father, a drunk mother, and a bastard older brother, and the world didn't seem any different to me after the bombs fell. But through all the times my old man gave me the beat down, forced to sleep with the dogs, out in the cold, the lights, the roar of the crowd, the only addiction I've ever had. Billy got drafted. Canada, I think, just left me, the old man, and Mum, but I wasn't the same kid as before. He learned it the first time he laid his hands on her. I was out on my ass after that. Told me I'd meet the business end of his shotgun if he ever saw me again. He fought back the tears, though, because his little boy had beaten the shit out of him. Vault-Tec took me in. I guess one of the supervisors had been a fan of me, my fights, told me they'd pay me to beat the shit out of some of their upstart Vault-Tec University students. I turned a whole class of them into cans of dog food and then shit them on the floor. They told me not to hit any of the girls. I said, fuck them. A pretty thing in glasses tells me she's next. I figured she had to be one dumb bro to fight me. The world doesn't show mercy, and neither do I. Thought I'd knock some sense into her, but a few weeks later she was back for more. Most weren't going to last. That first one up and left Vault-Tec altogether. Probably went back to his boyfriend. But that pretty little thing stayed. She knew the terrible price of what was coming, and she wanted it all. I met her fella, some guy by the name of Ivan. Out to look at, some muscle, not useless, but I knew he was her biggest weakness. I wasn't surprised when they named her overseer, but I knew she couldn't take him with her. Victory always comes at a cost. I was surprised when Vault-Tec told me I was being assigned to a vault. I figured they would left me to the world. I showed up at her doorstep, but I knew why she wanted me. She wanted them to survive. I put everybody through their paces. Nobody was left out. Guys, girls, anybody, everybody. I selected a few, here and there. The ones who were gonna last. Annabelle, I guess they now call her the A-bomb. Jerry too sure. A nasty left hook, an even nastier uppercut. I don't know what challenged him more, me, or Annabelle. And then there was Sebastian, a soaking wet kid with a killer shot. Barely touched me but took everything I gave him, and more. When I came out of the vault, the sunlight, like the bright lights of the ring, I'm not sure, but I could almost hear the bell. I remember breaking open the skull of that first scorched thing, the crack of bone, the grunting piss of it as he collapsed. Flatwoods, I remember betting a girl from there. What was her name? I don't know. The responders. Still divided on them. Are they facing the new world or just keeping the old one on life support? I followed a few others up to Morgantown, stopped to check out the Slocum Joes, what I'd do for a cup of decent coffee and a cigarette. Quite the massacre at the airport. This scorched thing ain't going away. Looks like that Fruit Loop Maxi was here. Who else would draw a dick on an eye but? I stopped learning medicine after first aid, but looks like we now have a vaccine. Fuck the future. I got my first new drinking buddy, a Miss Nanny by the name of Rose. I got a good laugh, a few good stories, and now she's out of rum. I remember reading about David Thorpe, some big wig at Arctos. Didn't figure him for a warlord of the future. But the cutthroats split up. 4 more gangs. Diehards, gourmands, Blackwater bandits, and the trappers. All failed. All died. It isn't about being a raider. It's being a survivor. Take what you need, but you need to build. They failed to chems, hungers, other addictions. I remember the Free States. I had friends, opponents really, from the area. Survival is key, but somehow they managed not to. These big dumb green monsters can't even stand up to me. Would be a good army if only they had a master. My brother Billy went into the army. Wonder if he could have made it into the Green Berets. I guess some of them made it out here on training. Liz Taggart D. Would have liked to have met her while she was still alive. I'm not much for power armor. I want to feel the bone shatter when I break it, but sometimes it's necessary. I got together with some of the others, some beer, some whiskey. We talked about what it would take to deal with the scorched once and for all. I met up with Annabelle. A bomb is what they are calling her now. She didn't even need to say a word. I told her I was in. It was rough, maybe one of the toughest fights I've had since we left the vault, but it's over. Kept some of those scorched off our snipers. I'm pretty banged up, but here I stand. With the round over, I head to my corner. Maybe gonna set up shop near the Slocum Joes. Some of them want some training and old Bruiser is ready for another round.